So welcome to the Wednesday, April 11th meeting of the Amherst Planning Board. First order of business are minutes.
I have no minutes tonight. Mr. McCarthy has promised me that he'll have minutes by next Wednesday.
Okay. So the next orders of business are timed items. So we're going to skip to number 3. Is there a, that'll take some time.
We have no, actually, I guess we do have a report, but it'll take a little time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we skip to number 4? So number 4 is town meeting, warrant review, Article 29. That'll take time. Yeah. Can we go to item B, movers and speakers? Anything there?
You've been appointed in absentia as a speaker on one of the articles.
For which one?
For the
Oh, yeah.
amend zoning map article. But
So
you can refuse to accept the position and pass it on to somebody else.
This is the petition article. Petition article.
Petition article.
I'm happy to do that. The only thing is I'm going to be away May 2nd, but it won't come up on May 2nd. No.
Doesn't, May 2nd. If you're away.
That's the first week. I doubt
It won't come up.
Okay.
But so,
I'm
Mr.
happy to do
Schreiber,
that.
I'll put you down for that, and if you're not going to be here, then you will ask somebody else to.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask them to turn this down. 'Cause
Okay.
Pointing the mics down also would be good. The speakers are up here.
So anything on planning board reports, the next item?
Most of the reports are in process, almost done. And they will all be done hopefully by Friday, and they'll be circulated over the weekend, so you can comment on them if you want. They have to be submitted by Tuesday.
Thank you. Town meeting, coordinating committee zoning forum, Tuesday, April 17th. Is that just for information? Yep.
I have Mr. Crowner, Mr. Birtwistle, and Mr. Stutzman, and myself who will attend that meeting. Okay?
Thank you. Old business, I'm still looking at my clock. We still have 2 minutes. Old business, topics not reasonably anticipated?
There's one topic that you have something in your packet at the very back of the new material that you received, and it's an invitation from GTI, which is the medical marijuana facility that's opening up on Meadow Street in North Amherst, and they are hoping to add a marijuana retailer establishment to their location up in North Amherst, and they are required to hold a community outreach meeting. So they're holding the community outreach meeting on Friday, April 20th at 5 p.m. at the Knights of Columbus Hall, which is at 45 Boltwood Walk, and they are inviting members of the community to attend.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Then we'll just do new business topics not reasonably anticipated.
I don't have any new business.
So I'm going to go back now. We're going to go back to item 2, public hearings.
Oh,
Up.
I forgot preambles. Would you like, I'll run in and get one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm so sorry.
Name tag is there. Who's supposed to be here? David, okay.
I don't think David's coming. He's at the herbology meeting.
Oh, right. That's right.
Maybe he'll come late.
Thank you so much. So we're gonna move on to the zoning bylaw amendment public hearings. In accordance with the provisions of sections 5 and 11 of chapter 40A, these public hearings have been duly advertised and notice thereof has been posted and mailed to the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and abutting towns. These hearings are being held for the purpose of providing an opportunity for interested citizens to be heard regarding the proposed amendments to the Amherst zoning bylaw. These amendments will be on the warrant for the annual town meeting. So the first one we're going to hear is A-07-18, zoning supplemental dwelling units, to see if the town will amend Article 5, accessory uses, Section 5.011, supplemental dwelling units, Section 5.0112, general requirements to allow supplemental detached dwelling units to increase the allowable size of supplemental detached dwelling units from 800 square feet or 900 square feet if fully ADA accessible to a maximum of 1,000 square feet of habitable space, or 1,100 square feet if fully ADA accessible. So the way that this app works is that we generally hear first, if it's our proposal, we hear generally from the zoning subcommittee, then we open it up to discussion on the board, and then open up to discussion from the public. So take it away.
So this article came out of work that the planning board and the zoning subcommittee have been doing for many months, years even, looking at housing issues and specifically housing issues in the town center and surrounding neighborhoods. And you know, there are a lot of ideas floating around out there, and a lot of ways that we've been thinking about moving forward. But the only one that is ready now is this one about supplemental dwelling units. A few years ago, we brought an article to town meeting that they passed that loosened the regulations around supplemental dwelling units. Supplemental dwelling units are an accessory dwelling unit to a primary residential use. So what's often called an in-law apartment or a garage apartment or something. We wanted to make a way easier to happen to promote sensible infill. And so we proposed a series of adjustments to the supplemental dwelling unit language. And one of those amendments was to allow detached dwelling units to be built outside of the main house, provided they're no more than 800 square feet. In any case, they would require owner occupancy of either the main unit or the accessory unit. Would be the supplemental unit would be restricted to no more than 3 adults. And it would require a special permit. The feedback that the planning department has received since that article was passed is that 800 square feet is not quite big enough for a detached unit. It's hard to fit 2 bedrooms or a full kitchen or something in there. And so we have proposed just increasing that maximum to 1,000 square feet. That's the only change. All the other provisions will remain the same. And there would be an extra 100 square feet if the unit is ADA accessible, to provide a little flexibility. So the zoning subcommittee recommends this article.
Thank you. So
Actually, this was proposed by Mr. Birtwistle, so.
So it's just me, because you're the zoning subcommittee, that's Mr. Birtwistle. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, let's open it up to the public. I see no comment.
I think it's a great idea.
I'm sorry, you have to stand and go.
John Edwards. Well, you don't have to talk.
No, you have to
just
talk into the
stand.
mic. You don't have to sit.
I think it's a great idea. I own a property at 33 Folkway Ridge, which is just a screaming example of how wonderful it would be. Either the little field in front or to the right of the carport and get the views and stuff. So I just think it's a great utilization of land. It's becoming so scarce. So, rock on.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I move to close the public hearing and to recommend that the planning board recommend this article to town meeting.
Second?
Discussion on the motion? All in favor of rocking on? All in favor of the motion? You had your, yeah. That's unanimous. The next one is 710, so E13-18, zoning, inclusionary zoning. This is a proposal by the planning board to see if the town will amend Article 15, inclusionary zoning of the zoning bylaw to clarify the applicability of Article 15 to require that affordable dwelling units be provided for projects resulting in a net increase of 10 or more dwelling units that request a special permit for use, as well as for modification of certain dimensional requirements, to require that affordable units be comparable to market rate units as to size and bedroom count, and to allow the provision of off-site affordable units and payment in lieu in certain instances.
Just a kind of a procedural question, maybe for Chris. Is it possible for us to open the second public hearing at this time, since they're interrelated issues, or shall we conclude the first before doing so?
I think you could wait until 7:15 and then open the second public hearing and have them simultaneous.
Okay.
I have 7:15-ish. Yeah.
I'll begin my
Yeah.
comments and then we can open the public hearing.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to restrict myself to this article. So these articles are actually almost identical, with the exception that our article has an additional provision attached at the end. But otherwise, they're the same. This is an attempt to finally get this right, to finally make inclusionary zoning applicable to development downtown that requires a special permit, without, we hope, dampening development interest in downtown. So the way we're doing this is having the special permit trigger only apply to modified dimensions that result in a larger building, whether or not it results in more units. So the dimensions that would trigger the inclusionary zoning bylaw would be building coverage, an increase in building coverage, an increase in lot coverage, an increase in height more than 2 feet, or the addition of 1 or more floors. All of those speak to a larger building. And that seems an appropriate place for the mandate to apply. It would not apply to other kinds of dimensional special permits like setbacks. It would not apply to special permits for signage or other things that don't speak to building size at all. And so we think that combination avoids the takings trap that we were concerned about before. It also, so that's what both articles do. And we worked on this article with the petitioner for the second article. We had a mutual interest in getting this right, and so we think we arrived at a good place. Our article adds a provision at the end for flexibility in complying with the affordable mandate. It allows for the mandate to be met by providing units offsite, affordable units offsite of the main development, or a payment in lieu of affordable units. And for, that would be true for units up to 3 for a small one. For 4 or more units, half of the units would have to be provided on-site, and then the other half could be one of the other alternate methods. The article would also fix some language here and there in the bylaw. It would clarify that we're talking about a net increase only when the net increase in the development site results in 10 or more units with the inclusionary bylaw kick in. We would drop some language that had to do with a previous version of this, where the affordable mandate required or was allowed to be met by a moderate income affordable unit. That's no longer the case. A year or so ago, we restricted the affordable units to low income affordable only. So that language is no longer needed. We clarified that the units have to be affordable in perpetuity to the extent possible for both ownership units and rental units. And we added size and bedroom count to the list of characteristics of affordable units that have to be the same for both affordable units and the market rate units. All of those are present in both units except for both articles except for the alternate compliance methods.
Yes.
So have you opened the second public hearing
We
now?
have not, and I was going to ask the board simply about their opinions about that, because wouldn't it make sense for us to reach closure on this one? If we, tell me what the thinking is to,
Well, I imagine we would have public comment that relates to both, so it
Okay.
would seem appropriate to have the public hearing
Okay.
open for both.
okay, so we're going to open up the second related public hearing. So this is A-12-18, zoning, inclusionary zoning. This is a petition by Weiss et al. To see if the town will amend Article 15, inclusionary zoning of the zoning bylaw to clarify the applicability of Article 15 to require that affordable dwelling units be provided for projects that request a special permit for use as well as for modification of certain dimensional requirements, and to require that affordable units be comparable to market rate units as to size and bedroom count. So here I have to, is our protocol then that we invite the petitioner to speak, or does the zoning subcommittee speak first on a petition article?
I have nothing further to add.
Pardon me?
I have nothing further to add.
Okay. If you'd like to speak to the petition.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Weiss, Precinct 8. First, I want to thank especially the members of the Planning Zoning Subcommittee that I worked with for many, many weeks, and to Chris Brestrup, who I worked with. I think we've come up with a really good set of articles, good compromise, and I'm going to support the Planning Board version because I think the flexibility of payment in lieu and off-site provisions, it makes it a better one. My studying of inclusionary zoning guidelines suggests that you do have as many incentives and or flexible provisions as possible. So I'm in favor of that. I would also add that I've done a lot of reading about inclusionary zoning in Massachusetts and in the country, and spoken to planners in Cambridge and Newton, and studied the Brookline model. And by and large, the consensus is that inclusionary zoning should be mandatory. It is in those 3 towns. If you have a certain number of units it's mandatory. You don't need to ask for a special permit for any reason. It's just done. So I'm putting that out to say that the Amherst version is even more flexible than most towns and cities because they don't have that inclusion. In Amherst, a developer could opt out by not asking for any special permits. I think it would be stronger to be mandatory, but I'm not going to go there on this particular round. I would hope someday the planning board will actually study this more and consider this. But for now, I'm happy with this possible improvement. A few other things I wanted to say. By the way, in Brookline, it's mandatory at 6 units or more. And in Cambridge, they're overhauling their inclusionary zoning because they want to make it even more effective. They're starting at 4 units and more. And they're going to be at 15 to 20% in Newton. So we all know that the current interpretation of a special permit that the planning board uses, meaning a special permit for use, has resulted in the elimination of downtown as a place where inclusionary zoning can be used, and that's what we're attempting to fix, and I appreciate that you are attempting to fix that as well. Because of that interpretation, we have lost the potential of, I think 26 units. Well, instead of 44 affordable units being added, because of the new buildings, we only have 16, which I believe means that 28 units have been lost, never to be seen. So given that there will be probably more buildings downtown in the future, if my crystal ball look is accurate, it would be good to fix this now. I have thought, because I've been at so many of the meetings, I've heard some of the concerns from the development community, and I just wanted to speak and I've thought about those, and I've asked the planners in other towns about these. So I just wanted to feed back to you my thinking about it and their thinking. That it's a hardship for developers, as I've said. This is the most flexible probably in the state in that it's not mandatory. It's difficulty administering. It's somewhat difficult, but they seem to manage it all over other places in the state and in the country. I trust our developers are up to the task. They're equally as smart as other developers around the country. The issue of the taking, in my talking to planners, they don't even know why that's being talked about. Nobody has ever challenged the mandatory inclusionary zoning in Massachusetts. So given that there's an opt-out for developers, why taking is even being talked about, they can't understand that. In my mind, we're in much more danger of having a lawsuit because of eliminating a region of town. And we all know that section 15.02 says that this should be able to increase affordable housing in all sections of town. And by eliminating downtown, you're in violation of that. So I would be more worried about that lawsuit than a taking. The tax incentive doesn't seem to be coming up much in discussions, and it will go a long way in helping developers get some of their money back. I spoke to Sandy Pooler recently, and when he and John Musanti wrote this, they expected it to make developers whole for their development, and Sandy believes it will do that. I heard an argument that it doesn't work in Amherst, which is an odd argument given that only one developer has ever asked for it, and I believe that's Beacon Communities, and I think they're happy with it. It's hard to argue that it doesn't work if nobody's asking for it. Of course, they don't have to ask for it much because inclusionary zoning isn't being used that much. I think those are the main points I wanted to go over tonight.
Thank you.
I'm open to questions.
So we'll start off with board discussion about both of the, you can stay there if you.
I'll stay there in
Yeah.
case you
Uh,
want to talk to
Both
me.
proposals. Of course, half of us are the zoning subcommittee.
Might I add that if Article 35, your version passes, I'll move to dismiss Article 36.
So I see no discussion on the part of the planning board, so I'm sorry.
I have a question rather than a discussion. First line of 15.15, the permit granting board or special permit granting authority may grant a special permit. May, the word may implies that it also may not, is that correct? And if it may not, under what grounds would it not?
What section is that?
15.15. Sorry.
Can you just say what you say again?
Okay. I'm asking whether, this is in the planning board's version of the warrant article. 15.15, the permit granting board or special permit granting authority may grant a special permit, et cetera. And I'm questioning the word may. Is the implication that it also may not, because it's a permissive verb there? And if may not grant is an option, what would be the grounds for not granting?
Chris?
Special permits are always discretionary, so the board always has the option of not granting it and requiring the developer to provide all of the units on site.
Okay, that would be the option then.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to the public for comment.
Thank you. Sarah LaCour, Executive Director of the Business Improvement District, also newly elected town meeting member, Precinct 9, or had been and now back. Can I just clarify, are both public hearings still open, or was one closed?
Both are still open.
Okay, thank you. So I could speak to both.
You can speak to both.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you so much. So as the zoning subcommittee knows, we've all been working on this for some time, and we had consultants come in and help us over the years. And I and the BID appreciate the need for affordable housing. We also appreciate the need for any housing. One of our concerns about this inclusionary zoning and any inclusionary zoning, in fact, across the state, was it actually doesn't build you too many affordable units, if any, and it jeopardizes the building of any housing. That's why downtown is so complicated, because there's a lot more factors going on than when you can build a complex like a Beacon or a Butternut Farms or an Olympia Oaks. Those are developments that are created to build us affordable housing, and we're getting large chunks of it at a time. And I would argue that those are the best ways for our town to get affordable housing. When you're modifying dimensional requirements in an affordable housing bylaw, inclusionary zoning, you start falling down a slippery slope. Things like, speaking to the planning board article, the height, the 2 feet height requirement, which would then put this into play. So what if you have a corner lot or you have a sloped site? So if the definition of determining height is based on the average of the street, if you have 2 streets and they're approaching the site from different heights, your 2 feet is really problematic. So how would that be determined? Who would determine it? And is that setting developers up for some kind of messy situation, or a situation that they don't really understand, so they won't develop? We would like to be able to make sure we get affordable housing, but we also, again, can't jeopardize any housing being built. That goes back to another point where if you're making it based on modifications or dimensional modifications, and then they can actually build within the parameters of what's defined currently in our dimensional tables, that's what they'll build. So you'll still get no affordable units from this inclusionary zoning. So back to my previous statement, we need to be looking at alternatives like how can we incentivize Beacon and Butternut Farms and Olympia Oaks, where we're getting many units at a time. I believe this needs more study. I hate to say that because I know we've been working on it for years, but I think this is still problematic. We are tossing in too many factors that I think are jeopardizing our ability to build any housing. We need all kinds of housing, all of it. It will trickle up, it'll trickle down. This town just needs units. We need 10,000 units in this town, and we need affordable. I don't see that this is it. I think it's punitive. I think it does not have incentives to speak to the tax increment finance type thing that we got recently, a few years ago back with Sandy Pooler and John Musanti. One of the reasons it's problematic is it's very public and it's very complicated. So a project like Beacon, who is already applying for state and federal funds to build a affordable housing complex, 20%, all their financials are already public record. For our local private developers who already literally have targets on their backs, they're not going to put all their financial data out there. So the reasons our local developers are not using it is it's too public, it's too complicated, and we don't offer any other incentives. The fee in lieu of, I appreciate the fact that that's an alternative to actually building them, but the bottom line is we are saying an affordable unit has to be built the same way market rate units, exactly the same way. So therefore, we can say you don't have to build it, but you have to pay us that amount. So the average median income, say Amherst, Massachusetts, around 80,000, 3 times it, you're at $240,000 per unit. So you're saying, okay, well, you don't have to build it, but you still have to pay us the amount that it would have cost us to build it. So that, to me, is not an incentive. So in summary, I really appreciate needing to get affordable housing. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we're there with these articles. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Powell.
Yeah, I want to respond to a couple of those points. First, to answer the question about where the height is measured. It actually doesn't matter where the height is measured. If the project requires a special permit for height, if the project asks for a special permit for height, regardless of whether it's on this street or that street or in the back or whatever, then this would apply. And as far as and just to correct the median family income for Amherst for 2017, I haven't seen 2018, but for 2017 it was just under $67,000. So 3 times would be a little under $200,000 as the payment in lieu.
And then if I could comment about the height issue, if the height issue is a problem in our zoning bylaw, it's a problem for all projects, including this. So, I mean, it comes up a fair amount as to where exactly on sloping sites that it should be measured, and I think we've reached, consensus over the years. But it's a problem. Yes.
If I could, I appreciate that, and I know that we grapple with heights, but now we're discussing the issue between a discretionary permit and a by right permit.
Yep.
And to me, that makes a difference.
Okay.
If there's some confusion.
Yeah. Then, Maureen.
Maurianne Adams, Precinct 10, town meeting member and a officer of the Amherst Community Land Trust. I do want to first address the implication that comes up time and again that inclusionary zoning is our only route to affordable housing. That is so obviously not true. There are many routes this town is taking to affordable housing, ranging from working with the homeless, trying to develop enhanced SROs, building buildings like Olympia Place, having home buyers like ACLT and inclusionary zoning. So I see it as one tool among many. Where it works, wonderful. Where it doesn't work, too bad. But the fact that we've lost the opportunity for more than 20 units because we hadn't thought through the implications for the downtown, for the prior interpretation of an earlier version of Article 15 that allowed for that interpretation, I think has been done a great disservice to this town. So that's one point. A second point, and then I think I'm finished, is that we're really, you as a planning board, of course want development, but you also represent the common good of the town. And we're talking about competing common goods. What is best possibly for developers, and what is needed because of the affordability crisis in this town. And so it's a balancing act, I believe, that requires negotiation on both sides. The side that had felt very strongly that affordable housing, IZ, should be mandatory, doesn't no longer feel that way. But we're trying to achieve with the zoning subcommittee and the planning board something that will be acceptable to the town as a compromise. And we've worked at this for 13 years, since 2005. I think that both of the proposals are excellent compromises. I think having the backup is a useful one if people are objecting to the flexibility that both Mr. Weiss and I and many others agree is an excellent idea, especially now that there is an Amherst Municipal Housing Trust to receive the payments in lieu. When this possibility was voted down before, the trust did not exist, and the consultant had told us that towns that use payments in lieu just have the money sitting over in a closet somewhere and not used. Now it would be going to a trust that would actually make very good use of it, and when we calculate what that funding might be for the units that we've lost, I think we're upward of $2 million. So I really want to emphasize what I see as your role as trying to do a balancing act for the common good of the town when we have two pressing needs that should not be in such competition that they rule each other out. Thank you.
So if I need to speak to the units that we may or may not have lost. And so for starters, I think that the insight that you brought to us that inadvertently the downtown was, pardon me? Jettisoned because of our interpretation of that. That's an excellent point. But whether or not those projects would have even been built, I mean, in other words, it's kind of fantasy football. So we don't know if those projects would have been built had they or nor do we know if there was another proposal to build, completely by right. So it's an interesting statistic, but I'm not sure that it's, I'm not, I mean, I think that we've come to a place where we can all understand what the problems are. So, but I think you had your hand up, actually. Did you want to say something? Yeah.
I just want to say, point taken. I hear you and I agree.
Yeah.
I forgot what else I was going to say. I was so eager to agree with you.
Wait, can I let me get my tape recorder out?
Yeah. I agree with Steven Schreiber. The point about, developers will just not ask for special permits. Obviously that can happen, and we'll be back at zero downtown, which speaks even louder to the need to make it mandatory, but we're not going down that road today or in town meeting. And if we end up back at zero, then we haven't lost anything. We're back at zero.
I'd just like to say something in support of the process. I think this process really worked well, no matter what you think of the outcome, because rather than blindly submitting a petition article without bringing the zoning subcommittee or the planning board into the conversation and having it be kind of dropped on us as a surprise, Mr. Weiss made the effort to reach out to the zoning subcommittee and the planning board to bring his ideas to them and ended up working out a compromise. So I think that worked out really well, no matter what you think of this particular article.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Ken Rosenthal. I live on Sunset Avenue. And Ms. Brestrup, you're right, and I want to thank the zoning subcommittee and this planning board for the time you've spent working through these issues, because I think you've reached a point where you have an article proposed that we can all be proud of. I want to make just a couple of comments. I've said this before, so I don't want to take a lot of time, but the prelude to the Article 15 talks about the desire for affordable housing in all of Amherst. The interpretation that was offered by former planning officer, Mr. Tucker, was based upon a letter that he submitted to you, and I know you have it, and I know you've seen it. And as a person who at one time practiced law, I want to just give you an opinion about that letter. There are letters that are written for clients that delve into the background, the law, and provide the solution to a question that nobody knew the answer to. And then there are the letters that can be written by an attorney for his client that simply gives comfort to the client for a preordained solution. If you read the letter that Town Council provided at Mr. Tucker's request, you will see that it cites no sources of any kind, not law, not legal decisions, no commentary, no references of any sort. And it doesn't even say that the interpretation that Mr. Tucker offers is the required interpretation. It's simply one that one may infer from the way the zoning bylaw has been written. It was clearly a letter meant to satisfy Mr. Tucker's predetermined position, and it had worked. And I'm sorry that it's had such an influence on decisions in this town for so long, because if you think about affordable housing and where the best place for affordable housing might be, the center of town is the obvious best location, because it's a place where places of business are within walking distance, where it's likely that a person who has no car will be happy to live because public transportation is accessible, and without public transportation, one can get to many of the services that one would like. So of all places for affordable housing, the place we'd like to see it, among other places in town, would be in the center of town. And the proposals that you have before you that I hope you will vote to approve tonight will rectify that. Thank you very much.
Rob.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that comment. So we definitely appreciate Olympia Oaks and North Square and those developments, but it is important to have affordable housing everywhere, and it seems very unlikely that we will get an all affordable development downtown. So the only way we're going to get affordable units downtown is if they're sprinkled in among market rate units. And so that's what this inclusionary zoning is hoping to achieve. And I neglected to mention the zoning subcommittee's recommendation about these articles to the planning board. We recommend, obviously, the planning board version of the article first and foremost. If this one doesn't pass, then we would also recommend the petition article. We would as a fallback, but we prefer our article.
No more comments from the public. Are we ready for a motion?
I move to close both public hearings and to recommend that the planning board recommend to town meeting that it approve Article 35. If Article 35 fails to achieve 2/3 vote, then the planning board should recommend that Article 36 be approved.
Second.
I'll go with Mike.
Go with Michael?
Yeah. Photo finish.
Next time.
Yeah. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next zoning article, we've been asked to delay till the petitioner can get here, which you think is going to be about 8:10? Okay. So we will go on then to, we're going to go back then onto the, so we're going to hold off on Article 34 until the petitioner arrives. And so we'll go to the planning and zoning, the zoning subcommittee report.
I guess I wanted to alert you to what we have discovered about the marijuana uses article that we have previously recommended. We stand behind it, but part of that article would increase the buffer zone for K-12 schools to 500 feet, and it would change the way it's measured from building to building, basically, to property line to property line. So it basically really dramatically increases the buffer. The combined effect of both buffers is that there are very few properties downtown that can host a marijuana establishment of any kind. That's not our intent to block it from downtown. You know, we weren't attempting to make it possible for downtown, or we weren't attempting to open the door for a marijuana establishment to happen downtown, but we didn't mind if it did. That's an appropriate place. It's a center, a mixed-use center. That's where they should happen. The effect of the previous buffer that is already in place and the increased buffer that we are proposing probably makes it unlikely that there will be one downtown. Just an FYI.
So in line with that, we're going to try to come up with some pretty good graphics that will go along with the planning board report that will show the effect of the buffers.
Any public comment? Any other? No? Is that the zoning subcommittee? Yeah.
May I ask you, does that include language that revised the sites that would trigger the buffer that, so as I recall, it wasn't there a proposed revision to, that it was where minors also gathered, played, not just preschool sites, for instance? I mean, am I misremembering? That was also a change?
So we are not adding any protected uses. We're just changing the way they're measured. Right now, all protected uses, including places where minors tend to gather, are protected by a 300-foot buffer. The only buffer that is changing is the buffer around K through 12 schools. So the high school for the downtown, Fort River for the East Village area, possibly the Montessori school in Pomeroy Village. We haven't actually calculated that yet. There might be one or two others here and there, but otherwise the buffer remains the same for all of those kinds of uses. No new uses were added, none were taken away.
Chris?
So the language of that section on the 300-foot buffer is actually places in which children commonly congregate in an organized, ongoing, formal basis that is not K through 12. So that means, I consulted the building commissioner on this yesterday, and he said that it would include a place like a church where children commonly come to church and go to Sunday school, et cetera. But it would not include, CVS or the CVS parking lot where children do congregate, but, not commonly on a formal ongoing basis. So there's that discretion. But so what we will do when we prepare these maps is we'll include schools, libraries,
Banks, community center.
didn't think about bangs, but that's probably one place, and churches, but not, Rayo's, outdoor
Behind
seating
Rayo's.
area or anything like that. Okay.
Are there any playgrounds or playing fields, athletic fields, that are not associated with schools that might be thought to be in this category?
Most of the places that are like what Mr. Birtwistle is describing are out in the hinterlands, so they're not near an area where such an establishment would be allowed. These establishments are only allowed in business zones or limited industry or professional research park and that kind of place. So a playground that's, say, in South Amherst, like Mill Lane, Groff Park, isn't close to a place where such an establishment would be allowed.
But Kendrick Park. What about Kendrick Park?
Kendrick Park would be, but right now it is not a place where children commonly gather on an ongoing, regular, and formal basis. Maybe in the future it would be if it had a
Plan
playground.
is that it will be. So what's,
But going, may I continue? If you go in an easterly direction, the area around Kendrick Park is already precluded by
Okay.
houses that are lining the east side of,
Gotcha.
the west side of Kendrick Park. I think that's all I had to say.
okay. Yikes. Public comment? Other town meeting warrant review, Article 29, general bylaw, zero energy building. So I think that we had asked to review this.
Mr. Schreiber asked to review it. Yep.
Yeah. So who knows the most about what's being proposed? Yeah.
Well, I know that the select board and the group that had originally worked on it, Mothers Out Front, organized an effort to come up with a compromise.
Yep.
And they did present it to the warrant review meeting last night, and it seemed that both sides, if you will, had come to an agreement that what they were proposing was a reasonable compromise and would be more, wouldn't be quite as restrictive as the previous version. Mr. Crowner was there.
So I think the key provision is that the zero energy mandate is for the design of the building. If the building is designed to be
Okay.
zero energy, then it fulfills the bylaw.
So if an energy model shows that it's net zero energy, then they're done.
Right.
That's much better.
And the minimum project size is $2 million instead of $1 million. So I think those are the two major differences.
Good. Anything other? So let's see, we've done the rest of number 4, we've done the rest of number 5, we've done the rest of number 6. Let's go to item 7.
No Form As.
Let's go to item 8.
I'm not aware of any ZBA applications.
Item 9.
Planning board, we have, I think I've told you about these before, but we have we have a special permit and a site plan review for the mixed-use building on University Drive. And might as well talk about that if you don't mind. There's been a little bit of mix-up in the schedule because the night that is scheduled to be heard, which is next Wednesday, one of the planning board members will need to recuse himself from that case, and that leaves us with only 5 members. So we will need to reschedule that public hearing. I've reached out to you to find out if May 2nd will work for many of you. And, I think I have heard from Mr. Birtwistle and Mr. Crowner that they would be okay with May 2nd at 4 o'clock. No from Mr. Jemsik, and no from Maria, Ms. Chow.
Yes, for me.
Yes for Mr.
I can't, I'm not going to be here that day.
What about Mr. Levenstein?
Trying to
figure it out.
We need 6.
You need,
And this is at 4 o'clock. So already at 5 o'clock, I have Mr. Levinstein, Mr. Crowner, Ms. Chow, Ms. Gray Mullen, Mr. Jemsick, and Mr. Burt Whistle, and Ms. Riahi, and Mr. Stutzman. So, but one of those people,
Site plan review.
now I'm asking for
Special
4
permit.
o'clock. Yeah.
so not only is 6 required for a quorum, but 6 votes are required.
For a special permit,
It would
yes.
have to be unanimous, okay.
Yeah.
I can be there at 4 o'clock.
Okay, good. So I just need 2 more.
2 more, yes?
2 more yeses for 4 o'clock on May 2nd. And I think I've got Miss Gray Mullen, but, well, I don't know if she's good for 4 o'clock. And perhaps Miss Riahi. So I've sent out an email to you about that. I'm sorry about this, having to change the schedule all the time. I know it's difficult for people, but we're trying to accommodate the applicants as much as we can, too.
And not to, but April 25th wasn't an option?
I didn't ask about April 25th. But, oh, no, that's not an option because I wouldn't have been advertising it in time.
okay.
Yeah. So it could be May 9th, May 16th, but I think the applicant would prefer it to be earlier rather than later.
So how many short of May, on May 2nd?
I have 4 yeses, 4 definite yeses for 4 o'clock. And I need 2 more. So perhaps Ms. Riahi, perhaps Ms. Gray Mullen.
Well, I'm looking at, yeah, I can't speak for party, but I was just looking to see if there was anything at UMass that would,
Well, I'll just do the best I can, and if I can't schedule it for then, it may have to be May 16th, which is also a town meeting night.
yeah?
We could post it and open it without enough members to pass the special permit if we had a quorum, correct? And then continue it, which would alleviate some of the posting issues, possibly?
It's already posted for this coming Wednesday. So
So you can
this
do
coming
exactly-
Wednesday, you can open it and then continue it without taking testimony. And then when we can assemble 6 people, we can continue it to that date. I should know by Wednesday who can come on future dates.
We could also, if I could theoretically, start the conversation with fewer members than are needed by 1 with the Mullen rule.
Mullen rule, you don't have to be here for the first,
That's right. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah.
so the Mullen rule, you have to be here to vote, right?
Yeah.
And they
can
couldn't
only
miss the
miss
second,
one.
yeah.
So I could watch the, no, yes, no. But we could continue it to the next Wednesday.
Continue it to the 9th?
No, to the,
Oh, open it next Wednesday.
open it when
but-
it's scheduled,
Yeah,
and then vote on the following Wednesday.
If I could, we could also schedule it for a somewhat irregular time, just for that
Yeah.
one item of business, for the purposes of the member that wasn't here to join the discussion about it.
say that again.
So let's say that we can all, or 5 of us can attend on the 18th and start, but that is not enough to pass the special permit motion. We could determine the best time for 1 additional member to use the Mullen rule and continue the public hearing to that point for just that 1 item of business.
That's right, you could do that. Mhm.
We're not talking about 4 o'clock on the 18th. We're talking about 7 o'clock still.
7 o'clock on the 18th, yes.
Yes, okay.
But is continuing it to the 25th possible? So if you opened it on the 18th, you could continue to the 25th, right? Okay. So does,
How many people are available on the 25th? I would need Mr. Burt Whistle, Mr. Stutzman, Mr. Crowner, Riahi, and David Levinstein.
The 25th is that Economic Development Forum.
Oh, yeah, I want to go to that too,
If
yeah.
anybody wants to go to that, I
Yeah.
sort of did want to go to that.
Oh, that's right. You could go for a Tuesday, except we
I
have,
could do a Tuesday.
it would be Tuesday, the 24th?
I could do that. Or I could do Monday. Or
There's
do
a
Monday.
precinct meeting that night.
Pardon?
There is a precinct meeting that night.
On the 24th, yeah.
That may still be workable.
I could do 23rd during the day, earlier, but, I mean, 24th.
Oh, 24th has the Groff Park meeting, kickoff meeting with the design.
And what was the problem with the 25th? Was
25th?
Economic Development Forum.
What time was that?
That's 6 to 8.
Mhm.
Meet at 5.
Meet at 5 on the 25th?
Yeah, would that work? Oh, no, we got something else. No, we got something else. What about 8?
8 would work better than 6
Why don't we
or
meet at
5.
It is fine,
Yeah.
8?
Yeah,
8 on the 25th?
do it European style.
So continue it to 8 on the 25th, and I'll need to get a room. And everybody who it can be there on the 18th can be there on the 8th, and plus Mr. Schreiber. Okay, try that.
So we're talking 8 o'clock on the 25th.
We may have to go for 8:15, just so people can leave one meeting and get to the next.
So, do you have enough for a quorum and a vote, or do I need to watch the video and then I can vote, or?
If
you
you're not
can-
here on the next week, if you're not here next week, then you would have to watch the tape. And then, or you, it doesn't have to necessarily be watch the tape, you would have to,
I have to watch the tape or read minutes, and
Yeah,
we
the
haven't
minutes
been
won't be ready
having
by
such a
then.
good record on
yeah.
minutes.
And then, yeah, that's what you have to do. And then you have to sign something or say something, or,
Sign something, yeah.
I can do that if you need an extra person for the 25th.
Yep.
I'm sorry, is that the Mullen Rule?
yeah. You haven't gone through training yet, have you?
I can't tell.
Okay, so we're good-ish, right?
Mhm.
Yeah?
Right?
Um, uh,
Creative thinking.
Yeah, takes a village. So let's do the planning board, no, so, we're on the, where were we on?
Nine?
Middle of 9.
Did I, so you were on
Oh, middle of
upcoming.
9, we went back, okay.
Upcoming planning board applications, and there's one other one, which I think I told you about last time. It's a preschool on Pomeroy Lane that's moving from one location to another. And I think,
Is that the one that we did the previous? site plan?
yes,
It is.
yep. Mhm.
And it's moving within the same building?
No, it's moving across the street to where the Valley Transporter is. Yep, and they're having to, it's kind of interesting because they're having to grab some of an adjacent parcel for parking. And they're building a new playground on the parcel where the school is going to be. So it's a little complicated, and they have an existing situation with, they're over on lot coverage. So they have to have a special permit to bless the lot coverage. So
And children will be
there's a lot going on.
congregating there.
Yes, children are congregating, that's right.
I know, I was just thinking it rules out another, but let's go down to the 10 planning board reports. PVPC, they're not here. CPAC, Community Preservation Act, Powery's not here. Ag Commission hasn't met. Design Review Board,
Yeah, we met last night and had interesting presentations about the location of the rental bike stations in town. 5 locations now. Reasonably split around town, as opposed to all being clumped together as they had been before. Also had an interesting presentation about the public sculpture exhibits coming up this summer that the architecture department at university is sponsoring. 4 of the units being placed on Kendrick Park and the others further up toward the university. The ones at Kendrick Park were of particular concern to the Design Review Board, since they are within its district concerns. One aspect of the two presentations was a discussion among the members of the Design Review Board about the board's function. It has felt to several of the members of the board, there are only 4 at the moment, that its function is both weak and diffuse. Diffuse in that it reports to or recommends to a rather wide variety of bodies: the Select Board, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, to name the primary 3 that it seems to report to. The other aspect of the discontent, I think is the right word, is that that the board has offered advice in many cases, both to petitioners who are looking for a project to be approved, and to the boards that we mentioned, that I mentioned before, and that advice is never acted upon. Is always accepted politely, but never has any effect. And I think the board members are concerned that their work is pointless, to use the strongest possible term. And I think the board, although it didn't get this far, would like to have its role reviewed, reconsidered, either by itself or by the other boards to which it reports, so that it has a little greater clarity about its function, if indeed it has a legitimate function anymore. So that's sort of where that issue stands. Nothing was resolved as a result of the discussion. It was only presented, and I suspect we may come back to it in the future, but there's no specific action being proposed at this point.
Wow.
I would like to assure Mr. Birdwhistle and the Design Review Board that in the past, the Planning Board has incorporated Design Review Board recommendations into its conditions for site plan review. I agree that it hasn't happened in a while, but for a time there were one after another we were referring to the Design Review Board. Steve, hopefully, will back me up on this. It's not always the case that you're experiencing now. That said, I agree with you that the Design Review Board's role and authority should be clarified, and I think it should be strengthened, but.
Yeah, so I was just looking at the zoning bylaw. So we do, when the downtown buildings are an example of where we basically defer to the Design Review Board but then the question is, does the Design Review Board itself have, enough authority or enough, are the guidelines strong enough? So, because basically you have to rely on the guidelines that are set up for you. But I think it's all worth looking at.
I think it's worth looking at too, but I wanted to say that the Design Review Board often has the power of moral suasion. Power of moral suasion. Bank of America across the street came in with a very, I won't even characterize it, a not acceptable design for signs. This was a number of years ago. I'm going to say it was like 8 years ago. And they met with the Design Review Board, and the Design Review Board was so adamant about not wanting what was proposed. And Bank of America came back with a better design. And whatever you think of what's there now today, it's better than what was originally proposed. And that was because of the Design Review Board having that influence. And they've also had influence on I can think of 2 other instances, a 2-family house on Taylor Street that was vastly different when it was finished than it was when it was begun because of the design review board. And I think that even Kendrick Place, whatever you think of it, was improved vastly by influence of the design review board. And that was a case where the developer was willing to work with the design review board. But I think those are the instances that stick in my mind about the design review board's influence.
So even if you think it got worse or better, it gives a whole nother body, a whole nother set of eyes on the same problem. And so then so yeah, I actually very much, the examples you're using, and I can think of others, that, have basically either helped give us confidence that we might be moving in the right direction or, hesitation. We need to get you some good projects. I think what we're going to do is stop here. So we're at item, are you done with this?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we're going to move now back to our 720 item, which is Article 34. These are the zoning amendment hearings, A-11-18, zoning amend the official zoning map petition to see if the town will vote to amend the official zoning map by changing parcels in the RO, outlying residential, zoning districts to RLD, low-density residential, in all areas of town, neither served by public water nor sewer. So this is a petition article, so I think what we'll do is we'll hear from the petitioner, and then we'll hear from the zoning subcommittee, then the board will talk, and then we'll open up to the public.
So you probably know my name, Van Kaynor, the petitioner, and I apologize for being so late. I had lessons until just now. And my last student lives on Weatherwood Drive, which is interesting because that's up in the neck of the woods where High Point Drive is. And I was telling him briefly what I was going to tonight. And he said, we're on our 3rd septic system where we are, so we hope this area is sewered soon. So there is certainly some concern about sewers. 27% of the septic systems in High Point Drive area have failed, according to the health department, which is kind of a normal thing for an older septic system, but it's sort of part of, well, one of the main reasons for my article is to help prevent the need for the town to sewer and water the areas above 425 feet elevation. So, so the chair mentioned the original article, but I have decided since to accept the suggestion of the planning department to change the wording of the article so that there wouldn't be so much unintended consequence if it were to pass of having non-conforming properties, which was mentioned at the last meeting here, I think. So I'm still a little bit unclear, and maybe Chris can give us some insight into how this is different. Are you aware of the amended or the new motion?
I'm aware of it, but why don't you?
I could read it.
Yeah.
So to see if the town will vote to amend Article 6, dimensional regulations of the zoning bylaw for the properties in the RO outlying residence zoning district that are above 425 feet in elevation above mean sea level and are not connected to town water and sewer, that these properties shall comply with the dimensional requirements of the RLD residential low density zoning district. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
And I would like, the only thing I haven't told Chris is that I would like, in addition to this, to have the reasoning, which was on my original article. There are 3 main concerns that this addresses. So I could read those again if you'd like.
So I think the reasoning is not normally included in a motion. Mr. Kaynor is going to give this motion on the floor of town meeting. And normally the reasons for the motion come up during the presentation.
Okay, I included them in the original warrant article, which would have been read at town meeting. Is that true? this whole page.
Yep.
And I was told that was okay to do.
I think Mr. Kaynor probably has to work that out with the moderator.
Okay, that's fine.
And you can feel free to, I mean, this is your presentation, so feel
Sure.
free to.
So the reasoning, I mean, you've heard it before, seen it before. One, to protect the sensitive wells and septic systems in these areas. And I can elaborate at town meeting, I would. And I will tonight if you want me to. Two, eliminating or at least delaying the significant expense of extending town water and sewer to these higher elevation areas. And three, bringing our zoning bylaws more into harmony with the goals of our master plan. So each of those three things seem to me sort of equally important. I think some are more important than others to my neighbors. I think the water one is a huge one. People feel vulnerable, which is why we asked that a hydrologist be hired. And I noticed the report is on the back table from the hydrologist that I think Peter Jessup hired. And they presented to the Zoning Board of Appeals a month or two ago. And I could speak about that if you're interested. I don't know what questions you have for me, so I'll stop now unless.
Let's hear from our zoning subcommittee, and then the board will talk, and if we have questions, we can ask. Sure. Then we'll open it up to the public.
First of all, I should say this was a petition article that we received, or that we first heard about after the petition deadline passed, and so we received it for the first time as an article that was on the warrant. So that was in contrast to the other petition article, which we received well beforehand. However, since receiving the article, the petitioner has been very interested in working with us, understanding our concerns, and trying to come to a compromise. We did not reach a compromise. The points that he raised about protection of wells and septic systems, about extending town water and sewer, and about bringing the zoning bylaws into harmony with the goals of the master plan. All things that we absolutely agree with and think are important issues to be considered and discussed. I think our preference would be to discuss those not in the context of a petition article that has to be acted on in a few days. It's a much bigger discussion. The planning board and the planning department have been thinking about appropriate development in the Cushman Village area for a long time, since the master plan, in fact. And it was certainly raised as an important issue a few years ago when the retreat was proposed. So I think this is definitely something that should be looked at. What is the appropriate development pattern, not just in Cushman Village, or not only in Cushman, not only on the corner of Market Hill Road and Flat Hills Road and that area, but all of Northeast Amherst. And so it is something that should be given a lot of thought, wider discussion, more talk with experts, engineers and planners and citizens. So the article itself, we find to be extremely broad.
Extremely what?
Broad. It's kind of overwhelming. The article itself, you can't really tell what it affects. We appreciate that the actual motion is going to be a lot narrower focused, so you can actually identify the parcels that would be affected, and that makes it a little easier to digest and understand. It's still a pretty impactful article. It affects a lot of parcels. It would actually have the effect of making dozens or perhaps hundreds, or something around 150, 200 parcels, potentially non-conforming, because although they are currently developed under RO zoning, they would have to now conform to RLD zoning, and if they wanted to make a change to their property, they might have to get a special permit. We don't know how many of those properties would become non-conforming. Some of them probably not. Some of them probably yes. It's hard to support the article for that reason. It's also hard to support the article that has the apparent intent to stymie or hinder a current development proposal in that area. And our understanding is that it actually can't prevent the development from happening. It would just change the nature of that development. We are also informed by property owners in the area that they will likely file preliminary subdivision plans for the undeveloped parcels in that area to freeze the zoning and potentially follow through with developing those parcels. That seems like a very unfortunate consequence of this article. So now it may be the case that it's not in the town's interest for those parcels to be developed. It may not. It's entirely conceivable that the town should take steps to prevent or limit development there. But we just haven't had the kind of analysis and discussion that we really should have for an article of this magnitude. So the zoning subcommittee's recommendation is against approving this article. We are not, we did not arrive at a decision about whether we should recommend defeat of the article or recommend referral of the article to the planning board. So that's one of the things that the planning board should consider as it takes testimony and hears further comments.
Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to explain a couple of things. So I did work with Mr. Kaynor on establishing some language that would make it easier for town meeting to consider this article, because originally there was no clear definition as to exactly what parcels would be included. It was very broad. It included parcels in South Amherst and other areas of town, as well as the northeast corner of town. And it also wasn't clear. What it would have done is it would have changed the zoning map for all of those parcels, and the parcels would be not currently connected with town water and sewer. But what if the town were to extend a sewer line or a water line up in their direction and they became connected at a future date? It would require a vote of town meeting or town council to change the zoning map back. So that really didn't seem tenable at all. We had some advice from the town attorney that if the original article had had a date associated with it, such that every parcel that's not connected to town sewer and water before a certain date would be changed. But anyway, it was really too big of an article. So we worked with Mr. Kaynor to work out this new language, which is actually reflective of language that's been used in some towns in the eastern part of the state, where you don't have sewer and water, you do require larger dimensional requirements. That doesn't indicate, our working with Mr. Kaynor doesn't indicate that the planning department supports the effort. But I just wanted to clarify that we were trying to give him something that he could bring to town meeting that was in scope and would make sense to town meeting members to evaluate.
So maybe I'll speak a little bit also. So in the past, when we've had either petition articles or planning board articles that are changing other people's property, in other words, it has been, even though we're not required to, it's really been sort of emblazoned into our psyche that we should be contacting the owners of those lands, those properties, that their properties are being considered for for rezoning. It's a big deal to rezone somebody's land. And here we are with a spreadsheet this big of people's land who's being considered for rezoning, and there's 2 people here. And I don't even know if you're here for this, for this particular article. So there's a miscommunication somewhere that I think that if everyone on this list were aware of this, possible change, that we would, has there been any communication too, other than the usual?
I'm not aware that there's been any communication. There were some discussions here in Town Hall about whether the town should take on the role of notifying all of these property owners, but initially there were absolutely hundreds of them, and we never received a clear list of exactly who would be affected. So we made the decision not to take the step to notify the property owners. They do get notified, if they read the legal ads in the paper, which hardly anybody does. So I would say none of them have been notified except for the people that you see here in the audience. May I say one more thing?
Yeah.
So our past practice has been when properties are being proposed for rezoning in a very localized area, we do notify the property owners. And when a particular parcel is subject to being rezoned, such as the parcel on University Drive that is currently being proposed for development, we did notify abutters within 300 feet. But that's a fairly limited mailing. I'm going to say less than 50. And this was just so large that we couldn't get a handle on it.
So after we had the end forum, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I respond just
Yeah.
to who's been notified? This petition article is not from just me. This is 22 people who signed a letter initially to the developer about our concern. And those people, many of whom signed my petition article, some didn't just because I didn't see them. So there's, and I've spoken to numerous neighbors, not all of them for sure, but the larger landowners, Tom Perrin, Barbara Ford, who have a developable lot. Many people who have larger acreage. George Howard, who lives down the road, has a building lot that he pays taxes on that he doesn't plan to develop, so he would actually love to have that not be a building lot. There are obviously many neighbors I've talked to who know about this and support me. Some of them said they would try to come tonight, but it's pretty, for various reasons, people get busy. And they don't, I had to inform them I was going to come late, so if they wanted to come at 7:20 when I was supposed to be here, and they would have missed it or whatever. Jack Hirsch.
No, they weren't. No, these guys.
Sorry, he's not here.
No, nobody showed. Yeah.
Okay.
There are people here for inclusionary zoning.
Fine. So I'm also willing, and I told Chris this, to do the mailing myself, especially if this amended article would not include the people with acreage that would not allow them to build another house on their land. Do you know what I mean?
So I guess conceptually the problems I'm having is that as written, it's either too broad or it's spot zoning. So it's either focusing too much on a particular isolated circumstance, namely the proposal to subdivide on the corner of Flat Hill Road and Market Hill, which is one of the conditions you mentioned last time, or it's too broad. To me, it just seems like it's a canon trying to solve it doesn't seem like the right tool. In other words, it seems like there is a conflict. You're trying to use zoning as a tool to solve the conflict, but there's other ways of solving that particular problem. So I wrote an email, I don't know if you saw it, that was circulated to I sent it to Chris, who sent it to the planning board, but it, really what my concerns were, I was thinking after the last time we met, that really the basis is, the infrastructure in the ground, the wells and the sewers. And so the thing that really came to mind right away was the Berkshire, really nothing to do with your proposal, but the Berkshire gas moratorium. So there's no longer new hookups to Berkshire gas. And so that actually causes an obstacle to all kinds of development, particularly in the downtown. The area served by Berkshire gas. So what if we were to amend the zoning map based on the fact that, gas is no longer available to those sites? We wouldn't do that. We would either assume that the problem would solve itself in other ways, or, projects would be less developed or more, differently developed than we had thought. So the point is that this is based on wells and sewer or septic systems. There are other forms of regulation that control those. So those typically actually aren't controlled through zoning. They're controlled through the Board of Health, through the town engineer's office. And that itself will determine what lots are buildable or not. So if a site isn't able to sustain water or septic, then it won't be built, it won't be sellable. It won't be, or whoever is trying to make that purchase will have to buy more land, et cetera, et cetera. So there's other ways that problem is addressed. I also went through the zoning bylaw to see what other uses there might be. And there actually are permissible uses that may use no water or may use no septic. So basing it on, again, on that kind of infrastructure, we're preventing from having a transformer station in your, there's all kinds of government uses, religious uses that can be pretty much put anywhere in town that may or may not use any water at all. A kennel, a heliport. These are all things that can be built in, as my interpretation of the zoning bylaw. Also, the other thing is that this is all based on sort of conventional ways of getting drinking water and conventional ways of treating black water. So we all know, we have 2 living building challenge buildings here in town that are all trying to promote other ways of dealing with waste and with dealing with drinking water that don't necessarily even involve wells or septic systems. So again, to sort of base zoning on an old technology doesn't seem right to me. And then finally, I think that this is my personal opinion, but I think 2-acre zoning is it's basically a sprawl. So it sounds like it's a master plan-y type, like a good master plan, but it's actually sort of a sprawl. 2-acre zoning is typical of, often used in communities that are trying to slow down development or prevent development. But what it does is it encourages sort of leapfrog development and frankly, sprawl. So and this is a time that I think we're trying to, live more compactly. So for those reasons, I'm out, as they say on Shark Tank.
Can I respond to several of those things? So I want to just mention, I'm fully in favor of alternate ways to treat wastewater. I was one of the people actually who objected to the sewering, millions of dollars we were going to spend to sewer an area of town without looking at alternatives. And when I was in town meeting in the late 1990s, and I brought an expert from Montague named Tad Montgomery, who is an expert in this field, and he talked to town meeting about it, about treating water on site. And it didn't pass. Instead, we got a sewer. It cost millions of dollars. The thing is, the DPW has a system which determines whether an area is got water or sewer. And it's a very systematic thing. You get a certain number of points if you have a certain number of septic failures. And that's all written down. And I don't know if you've seen it, but I've got a copy of one page of it that talks about the percentage of wells of septic systems that have failed. So I don't think you're going to see at High Point Drive when in 2005, there was 27% failure rate, that the citizens are going to say, oh, don't worry about us, we'll just put in composting toilets. I think you're going to see a lot of pressure to sewer that area. in sometime in the future. And it gets very expensive to take out all of your leach field and replace it. So even though I support the alternates, when you have more and more houses, and I don't have, I can show you the map, but RO zoning, I know you think that two-acre zoning is sprawl. I see it as protecting the outlying areas from density. And if you look at Shutesbury, do you consider that sprawl? I mean, maybe you do. I consider it a more country-like town. They have a 300-foot limit for frontage and 3-acre lots. So to me, it's more aesthetically pleasing, maybe because I grew up in the country. I don't consider that sprawl. I consider that more pleasant environment than having 7 houses on 8 acres. To me, that looks like suburbia. So I understand different perspective. I just disagree. And, oh, darn it, I was going to say one other thing. I've lost it, so I apologize. It's for now. Thank you.
Open up to the public.
I'm Peter Jessup, and I've provided a short summary of my remarks to you in writing, so I won't belabor those points. And I've attended the 2 meetings of the zoning subcommittee and appreciate the work that's gone into this so far by that committee. I think actually my primary objection was summarized by Ms. Brestrup and Mr. Crowner earlier with the 2 public hearings where they referenced months and months and months, years of work on inclusionary zoning and on other items that really take a lot of deliberation. I think in this case, this is a proposal that has come out of the possibility of developing one small parcel in North Amherst, and while the residents of that area apparently were okay with the zoning when they moved there, now they would like to attempt to make it less dense. I'm not quite sure I understand the logistics of that. Sorry. I'm not sure I understand exactly how that makes a great deal of sense from a zoning point of view, and I think that there are lots of potential unintended consequences to this. I think Mr. Schreiber also referenced that we have a well-established mechanism in town for providing wastewater disposal and drinking water, and if you can't meet those standards, you can't build on the property. So I think that pretty much summarizes my comments. Thank you. One last thing, I would recommend that the planning board recommend that this article be dismissed.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, back to the planning board. Motion? Discussion?
I'm not going to make a motion. I think we need to discuss it a little bit more. But I don't think that we should recommend to dismiss, because dismiss is a harder. I think if the idea is to get rid of the article, the best way is to defeat it rather than to dismiss it. Dismiss it requires 50%. Defeating requires 33%. The question is whether we should refer it to the planning board and consider the issues that it raises.
The defeat requires 33% because you need to 66% for it to pass.
Right.
Had these issues ever come up before the particular development in question?
Not that I'm aware of.
So, okay.
So they actually are coming up. I mean, he's told us that the septic systems are starting to fail in that area. So the issues are there.
And the only letter we have from the DPW is about wells. So were they also asked about, well, there would be the Department of Health that deals with septic. So do we have any other information about that, the failed septic?
No, we don't.
But, I'm sorry.
I think the real issue before you is, and I accept Mr. Crowner's idea that it may be better to actually defeat this article. I'm happy to have the zoning subcommittee take this up if it's a good idea. I just don't think this can get resolved with so little public input. There's really only been 2 of us that have spoken to this issue, and there must be 150 property owners that would be affected. I think we do a real disservice as a town to consider an article quite so precipitously, in my opinion.
Just for your information, and I know you all have such a busy time of year, and just in general, I can't believe how many meetings you go to, or whatever. So I respect your time, but Guilford Mooring provided me with, and it's available on the town website. It's the appendix of this particular thing, it's the Appendix A of the Town of Amherst Sewer Extension Master Plan Evaluation Matrix. And it's available, you can look at it. I printed it out. This is one page of it, which just has the number of failed wells in various areas of town that don't have sewer. And the highest numbers are Market Hill Road and High Point Drive, with 29% on Market Hill and 27% on High Point Drive. And this was 2005, so this is a bit old. So this is available to look at if you want to know more about the septic situation. This is from the health department, said Guilford Mooring was a better source for this kind of information, he thought.
So I can see a concern that if this area were sewered and watered, that there would be immediately follow proposals to make it more dense. You know, in other words, to make it everyone's favorite RG zone, or something like that. But I still don't see the relationship between that data and what the land size should be, because.
So I didn't mean to get into detail tonight, but I will, because it seems relevant. So the hydrologist who was hired by Peter Jessup to report came to this Zoning Board of Appeals meeting and said he saw no issue for the neighbors, the abutting neighbors. The only issue he saw was perhaps for the 5 new wells which are being drilled, proposed in this 7-lot development. There were 2 existing wells on the property now. 5 more would be drilled, and the concern was, well, those wells are getting awfully close to each other. Now, I did a little more research and found out, why is there a concern? There is a general standard that 50 feet is enough to not be affected by the next well. However, if you look a little more deeply into it, if there is a low gallons per minute output of that well, the cone of depression, which is what they call it when you have a affected area, widens when you have less water. So this is all a guessing game. It seemed to be a little bit dicey when you try to fit that many lots on 8 acres of land. And they recommended specific places where 2 wells should be drilled if the 5 lots were developed.
But requiring twice, so you would require, your proposal is to require more than twice the size of the land.
Correct.
And for flag lots, which already have to be twice the size of the minimum lot,
Right.
4 times. So basically,
I don't know if that's true.
am I saying that if you do a flag lot, the minimum lot area is twice what's normally required? So this
It would be 160,000 square feet if you went to the RLD zoning. So I think what you're saying is you would go from the requirement of 30,000 square feet for a lot, twice that would be 60,000 square feet. But if you had RLD, 80,000 would be the basic lot, and 160,000 would be.
Basically, you would
flag
require
lot.
5 acres for a flag lot, but, which is bigger than downtown. I mean, it's.
So can I respond? And this is the last I'll say. Just the focus has been so much on the water and sewer. I just have to remind you, it seems like I should rip it up and throw it away. We have a master plan from 2010 that I have here, and it is not saying conflicting things about this issue. It says very clearly in many places, and I'll just read one quote I read to you before: the town should comprehensively review and revise its zoning and subdivision ordinances to ensure that growth management regulations are aligned with the growth needs. Okay, you could say we need development in our area, but then it says, and land preservation priorities. Regulations should seek to preserve the environmental and scenic value of Amherst's significant rural landscapes. To me, this is the more important issue. It's about how our town looks and is develops, and I went to those meetings years ago when we did the master plan, and there is always energy for denser development. There seems to be no energy for doing what I'm doing, and I guess it's not done very often because it's a taking or whatever, like you mentioned. But to me, you are not following through on what the master plan asks us to do, which is to look at these places in the outlying areas that have beautiful landscapes. How do we protect them? They're not protected.
But there was a stasis. So as it was pointed out earlier, that this has been zoned this way for, I don't know how long, decades? Yeah, let's say decades. So there's a stasis that people bought, people sold. In other words, people lived in harmony. And then there were a couple of things that threw that harmony off balance. Maybe the retreat was one, right? And then, but the retreat was going to be on public water and public sewer, right? They were
going to put in their own.
They were providing
They were putting their own for the whole subdivision, okay. But then, so there's the approval not required. So in other words, people can build along a frontage already. And so, as I understand it, what the point of contention are flag lots, right? Flag lots. You had mentioned that the subdivision on Market Hill and I'm sorry, I don't even know that proposed subdivision was the impetus for it.
It certainly put it in our faces that this is allowed in our area, this density of development, and it's just not compatible with the neighborhood in terms of its.
But there's other houses built along the frontage already.
There are, but not clustered this densely. And it's bothered me. Flat Hills Road, Cinda Jones keeps putting lots out for sale, and they sell, and the house is built. Little by little, our area is becoming suburbia, I admit, and yet this is right next to these, well, it is. For 250 years, it's been farmed, so it just seems to me like this is not compatible with the current, whatever the word is, neighborhood. There's a lot said in the master plan about that, preserving character of a neighborhood. And this seems to be not a concern at all from above the planning board, is the character of the area. Last comment.
So I agree with him. I think this development does change the character of that area. And I think that the master plan does express concern about that. And so I sympathize with him. I think that the view at Market Hill and Flat Hills Road is very nice, and it'll be changed. Maybe for the better. I don't expect that, but maybe. But I don't think this article is the right way to address that concern. I think we do need, the planning board does need, the town does need to figure out what does the master plan mean about protecting rural viewscapes? What does it mean? How do we do that? So he's raising a very important point. The lots are going to be developed whether or not this article passes. Instead of 7, there might be 5 or 4 or something, but they'll still be developed. It'll still be changed. So if we get that consideration, is this the right article? No, I don't think so.
I was just gonna say, we had discussed this at the zoning subcommittee meeting, and I was ready to just dismiss, but then we talked it through, and I agree with the petitioner in that we should study this, we should look into it, we should look into preserving open space. That's absolutely part of our master plan, and like Rob said, this is probably not the right way to do that. So I agree with the zoning subcommittee where we should think through this, study it further. There's a large, I think it was like 30 of your parcels are actually a development just south of where we're talking about. So it seems like it's a trend that has already occurred, and yet, the parcels you're talking about, rezoning are already in that development pattern that you're trying to prevent. So it seems a little, something's a little off balance, so it obviously just needs a little more thought. And so I do sympathize with you. I think that you've done a lot of research. It just needs to take a little more time, something this broad. So I think what was the suggestion we were thinking we might refer back to the planning board for, for you to come and, help us through this, or we can start to think through initiatives, but that this article, yeah, it just, it seemed a little too rushed and a little too broad at this point.
So part of it is state law, right? A&R. So approval not required, so you can do frontage lots in Massachusetts. It's somewhat unique to Massachusetts that you can just do frontage lots. So it's not just, it's not just Amherst. We should be lobbying our legislators to do zoning reform, and that A&R modifications have always been part of that. But there's other, again, there's other remedies. There's the possibility of conservation, putting in conservation. I note that a lot of, neighbors sometimes buy land to protect it. So, there's all kinds of other ways to, to protect that. I just think that this is too broad of an instrument. And I won't be on the planning board after June, and so if the next planning board wants to make this a priority, I'll come to the public hearings.
Steve, may I? I live in this area and I walk by this property on a regular basis. And I do find it a very pleasant place to be. And the notion of a 7-unit or 8-unit or 5-unit subdivision on that property is, for me, more about hoping it will be architecturally well-designed and harmonious with the landscape, rather than thinking that it should or shouldn't be per se. I think that part of town is reasonable for additional development. I just hope it's good development. And I have no way of knowing whether that's going to be the case or not. I can only assume it will be. If I thought that it was somehow wrong for this particular development to occur, I would still think that this particular warrant article would not be the way to get at it. It seems to me that your basic, the petitioner's basic point about the master plan not being honored in the granting of the building of this development is the most important part here. And I think that's the part that the planning board can in fact do something about if it chooses to do so, which is to consider what in fact that protective aspect of supporting limited development and supporting viewscapes and the like, in fact means in a practical and functional way. And I think the notion of referring this article back to the planning board for further study may be the most efficient way to get at that if the planning board in fact wants to study this. I would hope we would, because I think as is the case with so much of the master plan language, it is not specific enough to solve the problems or to answer the questions that we often ask of it. So I would support the notion of referring this to the board if we can figure out a way to do that.
So I agree with almost all the comments made by fellow board members here, and I'm going to move to close the public hearing and that the planning board recommend to town meeting that it refer this article back to the planning board for further consideration. And should the article not be referred, the planning board recommend that the article not be adopted.
Second.
Who seconded?
David.
David. Thank you.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. It passes unanimously.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on our jumpy agenda here.
So may I just clarify? Referred back to the planning board, and if it doesn't get referred back, to dismiss it or defeat it?
Recommend not adopting.
Not adopt. Thank you.
We're on Roman numeral 10. I think we've reached the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust.
Has not met.
Okay. Zoning Subcommittee, we've heard from you, Jack.
Met, but nothing to report.
Okay. And then Downtown Parking Working Group, no rep here. Report of the chair, none.
Report of staff, none.
We're done.